Hi, it's Dr. Parikh, and we're looking at article notes. So in the templates, there are two different types. There's empirical and non-empirical. Your paper starts, let me make this a little easier to see. Your paper starts with 3 empirical articles. Some of your later classes will require a certain number of empirical articles. Some may just say it needs to be peer reviewed. Empirical means that they are analyzing data of some sort, rather than just, your literature review paper is synthesizing ideas from different articles. You're not collecting and analyzing any data, but you are discussing main ideas from other things. And there may be lots of excellent articles that are doing the same thing. But we're going to start with things that are doing studies. So just like usual, you will make a copy. And I may actually make a place where I share all of these that I'm developing for these videos so that you can have it. For now, I'm just tossing it in a different folder. So you'll make your own copy. All right. So here, as you go through, I try to build in opportunities to get lots of feedback. So although you don't typically resubmit assignments to be regraded, I try to do some things that help with that. So for the reference, you will copy and paste the reference as it appears. And let me, sorry. What am I looking for? Dr. B. There, that was the better way to find it. But I can actually... So when I give you feedback, my goal is for you to actually make changes based on that feedback and to resubmit an improved thing the next time. So we'll do that. I'm not really fussy about whether it's double spaced or not there. Just make sure that if you are copying and pasting things, your final version is in the correct formatting. Again, here I'm trying to see as much as I can in one space, so it's going to be a little condensed. But if you got feedback on your reference list that something was wrong, you can attempt to correct it here, and then I will check it again and give you feedback on, usually at this stage I might just highlight it or something like that. Keywords, this is just your making things up. And I recognize formatting it all lowercase unless it's a proper noun, because that's the way keywords in your abstract will be formatted. So here I might say storybook, emotions, young children, culture, United States. And this, I think of just kind of thinking of what will remind you, once you have this big stack of articles, what will help jog your memory about what this one was about. So it's going to be also relative to what your other articles are. If all of your articles are about storybooks and emotions, then those aren't particularly helpful to you here. All right, so for the first one, you get to recycle some work. So if I grab, so for the original, I'm going to put that right there. And I just took the formatting out from it as I went. And I will just take one of these. In this case, I already have 2. I'm going to just say same as above, because I'm going to use exactly the same section. Normally, at this point, you would probably be starting to read your other articles, so you might have a better idea of what else you want to pull out of the first one. But in this case, I'll just go with the same main point. And again, make sure that you're using citations. This lets me check your citation and give you feedback now where there's not huge penalties. There are small penalties, but not a big deal typically. Whereas in your final paper, there's much bigger penalties for having citation errors. It also makes sure that later you can copy and paste without worrying about forgetting where you got an idea. The next one is the professional application. So think about this article and think about how somebody could use this article to use the main findings to help do their job better. So in this case, we actually do have a section in this article where there's discussion about parents, librarians, and other educators. I specifically don't have you write about parents because I want you to write about the people who are going to be reading this article. I want you to think like a professional rather than here's like a blog post for parents who are trying to figure out how to teach emotions or how to pass their culture on. So I might say family therapists can encourage parents to use storybooks to teach cultural values related to emotions. Again, this is not my best writing in the world. It's very much first drafts, but it's getting the idea across. And make sure you want it to be specific to this article. You don't want it to be something so generic you could have written it before the semester started. And let me see, storybooks to teach young children cultural values related to emotions. Values about emotions. And here I'm going to assume that family therapists know how to work with families, are generally culturally competent, all of that. This is, how can someone jazz up what they're already doing? How can they build on their typical work? All right, so this is Empirical Articles. And I have a separate one for non-empirical articles. So if you are looking for participants, research question, variables, and you cannot find them, that's not a great sign. It could mean that your article is not actually empirical. Again, not great. One thing I'm going to point out is that I'm only having you pull out 2 main ideas. I used to do a lot more, but I've realized it's much easier to get the integration and to focus on main ideas if you just take 1 or 2 points from a lot of articles. So I've shifted slightly from past things. If you look at older sample papers, some of them may have a lot fewer sources and may use a lot more information from them. Okay, so I actually haven't done this part yet because I want you to see how I find this information. So participants is the one section that I let you copy and paste. And a few of these things you can copy and paste, but be very clear, use quotation marks, the whole deal. All right. So you want to find the method section. Normally, the method section starts with participants. But in this case, so they've got the present study, they're talking about what they're doing. And we start with procedure because there are no people in this study. The participants are the storybooks. Let's see. Oh. Let's see. So here I'm going to copy and paste the rest. So I've kind of made my own note of what it is. And I'm going to remove the formatting. I used my Command or Control paste. So Command V, Control V, or I'm sorry, Shift. Adding Shift is what I do differently. So this explains where everything was found. And I'm just going to add a quick I'm going to add the page number just so it's easy for me to find. And you're supposed to do that when you quote, but specifically I want it to be easy for me to find this information later if I need it. So they explain how they chose the books for this study. All right, purpose or research question. So let's see, there's a couple good places to find this. So the present study is sometimes a good place to find it. Sometimes right before. However, less is known regarding. Books may vary. More people may be present. So these look like specific hypotheses. This is getting to be pretty detailed. You can see when you copy and paste, sometimes there's line breaks that you have to deal with. I'll include these. I'm just going to do a ... to show that, oh, I got to use my shift when I paste, to show that there's some stuff that I left out. I think I'm going to look back down at the discussion, because usually in the discussion they state the purpose pretty clearly. Yeah, I think this one here is the best one. I'm going to look down at the conclusion to see if they state it. Yeah, so they don't have a specific conclusion section. Sorry, I know that I'm just kind of wildly scrolling. All right, so independent variable. That is what they are manipulating, or what is grouping different groups. So in this case, the independent variable is going to be main characters, racial and ethnic group. And I'm going to copy and paste from up here exactly how they've written it. And I'm going to use an IE, which means these are the categories. These aren't examples. These are the categories. Dependent variable, which is outcome. It's going to be types of emotions. Let's see what else they categorized. So here, what are they looking at? Mean number of people per emotion display. Because they were kind of looking at the emphasis on groups So you see, as the culture gets less collectivistic, you see fewer people present during emotional displays, and particularly Asian American and Hispanic and Latino were higher than European American. One thing you'll notice is the APA style has moved away from using Caucasian or white, and instead wants to, when you're working with US population, wants to reduce that stigma between white as normal and everyone else as hyphenated Americans, and just representing everyone in the most consistent way possible. What else did they measure? Arousal level, so kind of how excited are things. So, mean arousal. And again, this is me, actually, I looked through this a little bit before, but not a lot. So you're seeing how I actually am going through. Let's see. So we'll say percentages of positive and negative emotions. Now, not everything is going to be in a chart like this. There's lots of ways that you can find this information. Part of it could be looking through, so here we'll see, you could get more specific with negative emotion coding, so anger, fear, dislike, etc. You could list these. I'm not going to be that picky usually, but it might be useful to know if that becomes something that you really want to talk about, some of those specific subtypes of emotions, then you might want to go back through and pull out those details. Let's see, intensity. So part of it is, as we look at the descriptions here, there are more things that weren't discussed. So positive, negative emotions. Intensity. Let's see. So we looked at arousal level, social context. And I think that's this average number or mean number. Mean just means average, but it's the word that we use in psychology. So the independent variable is whatever is being manipulated, if there's a manipulation, or how people are being grouped. In this case, they're being grouped, the books are being grouped by racial and ethnic group, so everything else is going to be a dependent variable. So limitation, this is going to be your words, so make sure you're not just copying and pasting, but thinking about what is something that this article is not doing. And one thing I'm going to talk about, this is one beautiful thing about limitations coming from you, is that you are bringing your worldview. One thing I am very sensitive to are smaller ethnic and racial groups, and also people who identify with more than one ethnic and racial group. And that's because of my family of creation. So I'm very aware, for example, my child has both European and Indian heritage, Indian, like Asian Indian. And so Asian American, usually when you think of Asian American, you think of more Eastern Asia countries. But South Asia is also grouped in there. But I don't think that it was represented in any of the books chosen. So my family is really not represented in this study. And that doesn't make it a bad study. You got to start somewhere. You got to start with the big categories, but it means my family is not represented. So limitation, this study, let's see. You want to so limitation, you want to write it in a way that you can just copy and paste it over into your limitation section later. So you want to not assume that you're mid-conversation with someone. You want to think about this just kind of coming out of nowhere. So you might say, Grady et al. 2019 did not include, let's see, only included 4 racial and ethnic categories and did not discuss any materials that combined racial and ethnic groups that showed characters from multiple. See, characters sounds like different characters have different groups. So I want to say who showed a main character with ties to, or with multiple racial and ethnic identities. Another piece that's kind of ignored here is that Hispanic and Latino is an ethnic identity that is also paired with a racial identity. And so you can have people who identify as European American, African American, and also Hispanic and Latino. And those groups may have very different experiences. You also might have someone who identifies as indigenous, and which is another large group not represented here. They're also, they list several limitations. I don't think they list this limitation, but they do list some of their limitations. I'm okay if you get ideas from here, but you want to make sure that you understand it thoroughly and that you put it in your own words. If you are taking an idea from here, I would like to see you copy and paste it just like you do for other things so that I can check. So copy and paste the original and then put your rewrite. But it's very, very tough here because it's always hard to go from one sentence into another sentence. That's why we take a whole paragraph and try to pull out one or two main ideas and combine them. They also talk about ways that this may have, ways that they may have had a biased list. And they're saying like, yeah, other people are using the same method. That doesn't make it a good method. It just makes it a common method. Future research. So you take your limitation and talk about what future research can do. The last thing you do is you just go back to the top and you just copy and paste here. I recommend using quotation marks again just to be really clear with yourself. You never ever want to forget that something is quoted. And the first page is page 207. And then you're done. The idea here is that it really pushes you to fully understand your article and the basics of what they're doing. You typically don't have to understand the stats that they're running at this level. There is a level, part of peer review is that people who understand the stats look at it and make sure they have done the stats appropriately and that the stats say what they're saying the stats say. But for now, that's above your pay grade, is a euphemism to say it's a higher level than we're worried about right now. Now your focus is on understanding the basic design of their study, what they were looking for, and what they found, and also being able to critique that in a simple way. One of the easiest ways to critique is always to focus on specific. I find it easiest to think about who's being left out. And again, in this case, it was very obvious to me because of my family. If I did not have a family with a somewhat underrepresented racial identity and specifically a multiracial identity, a multicultural identity, then it might not have stood out to me. And again, for me, what stood out was Indian and multicultural, because that's what affects me most closely. And then as I was talking, it's like, oh yeah, there's also no indigenous or native people represented. So we all have strengths and weaknesses. They're also not talking about immigrants versus people who just have that background. There's all sorts of diversity that can affect things. You could also look at variables that are being left out. So perhaps, for example, never would have occurred to me to count the number of people included on the page. But there might be other things that I see as more important. So, for example, I might see who is solving the problems in the book. Is it an individual? Is it a group? Is it an outsider? So I might say, I think that's really important for cultural messaging about how do we solve problems? Who is there to solve problems? It's also not considering other characters beyond the main character. So there's lots of things that aren't being measured that could be quite relevant. So although you can stick with what your article has to say, you don't have to. There are always things that you can explore on your own. And if you do stick with what your article says, it is up to you to demonstrate that you have changed the words by copying and pasting. Future research, they very rarely follow up as directly as I want you to follow up. And so even if you get your limitation from them, your future research will probably be completely your own writing because they're just unlikely to follow up. Usually they're kind of looking at different things. But for this class, I want you to show that you understand how research builds on itself. I think that is it for this article note. I will briefly, let me pull up the other article note style. APA. So non-empirical article notes start out very similarly. Paraphrase 1, paraphrase 2, but they just have the purpose or research question, sort of the main why did this happen, and then the abstract. So it's a little simpler. There's not, in this case, there's typically not a research design to complete. Oh, and I forgot to write non-empirical. That will be more clear for people now. All right, I think that's it. Take care. Bye-bye.